The ball python breeding hobby has been experiencing an issue for the last several years, and while this issue is really complicated and there's not any single one simple answer in order to fix it, it is imperative that the ball python breeding hobby as a whole finds some kind of balance, otherwise the vast majority of new ball python breeders will be unable to create any sort of meaningful reptile breeding business. And ultimately, the dilemma boils down to one specific thing. How long can existing ball python breeders continue to sell animals to people specifically for the purpose of breeding them before the entire market becomes so oversaturated that nobody, even the people who are already in, are able to create any sort of meaningful revenue that can sustain their business? My name's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and let's get to it. This topic actually came about from a conversation that we were having at the All-American Reptile and Plant Expo in Denver, Colorado this last weekend. So, Saturday night, we were recording an episode for Two Peens in a Podcast. It is an amazing reptile podcast. We're going to link it down below. But anyways, so we are recording this podcast, and about 50 minutes or so into the podcast, the topic gets brought up, and that is about how challenging it is for new ball python breeders to get into shows because a lot of shows are closing their doors to new ball python breeders, and subsequently, what effects is this going to end up having on the reptile market when those newer ball python breeders are not going to be able to sell their animals as well because one of the main venues that have previously been used to sell reptiles is closed to them. So anyways, we were all getting really deep into this conversation when Troy of Best Dressed Balls looked over and realized that he had never hit the record button.
You sabotaged this on purpose, you piece of shit, didn't you?
So, I wouldn't even notice I had not just stared at that for a second. I was like, why is that not red?
In order to discuss this topic, I think that it's really important that we understand what are the basic kind of economic conditions of the ball python market right now. And that is at the lowest level, the entry level into the hobby. It is breeders who are creating pet level animals, and by pet level animals, we define this by animals that are under $500. And they are selling these animals to people who are not part of the reptile hobby right now. And as these pet owners end up getting these animals, the vast majority of them end up just having them as pets. But there's a small percentage of these pet owners who get really interested in the breeding side of the hobby, and they end up deciding that they are going to become entry-level breeders. And entry-level breeders is a segment of the hobby where these are people who are buying animals specifically to breed them. But because they're just starting out, often the budgets for these individual animals are fairly low, and they're often looking for animals that are going to allow them to create a clutch much faster than buying a hatchling, so proven breeder females are really attractive to this specific market. Now, of the entry-level breeders, there are going to be a large portion of them who don't ever actually breed in any meaningful way. Maybe they might have a clutch or two, but that's about it. But there is always going to be a small portion of them that get really into the breeding hobby, and in my opinion, they level up to the enthusiast level breeder category. And at the enthusiast level breeder category, these people are buying a ton of animals, and they're also often spending much more money on each individual animal. It is not uncommon for an enthusiast level breeder to spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, sometimes even up to $5,000 on individual animals in order to help them achieve their goals. Part of this is the breeding goals because they want to hit specific combos, because they want to see what those combos look like, but also it is a business. So the business goals deal with generating revenue and subsequently profit for them in order to support their endeavors and hopefully, maybe one day, allow them to take their reptile breeding hobby into a full-time income. So when we are looking at the enthusiast level breeder market, one of the biggest challenges is that the byproduct animals of the industry leaders are these animals that are hitting that $1,000 to $5,000 range. And these animals have the chance to make more $1,000 to $5,000 animals, and depending on exactly what they're paired with, can make animals that are $20,000 to $30,000 worth. So the challenge comes in is as the industry leaders and other enthusiast level breeders are getting more and more people into this category, what's going on is that there is an increase of supply in the specific animals that they are creating. Also, there is an increase in essentially competition within this market because 9 times out of 10, the person buying a $5,000 animal is intending to breed it. So every single time you're making that sale, it is increasing the number of people who are trying to vie for the same target audience that you are. So the core issue of this dilemma deals with as existing breeders are selling animals to other people who are solely intending to breed them. This means that you are going to be subsequently increasing the supply of those specific animals for those specific projects, and you are increasing the competition at a later date. And at a certain point, both of these factors can really mess with the overall market. So obviously, if you have an increase of supply for a specific project and you don't have enough demand, this is going to force the prices to fall due to the negative pressure on them. And once they find an equilibrium, they will level out at that specific level. But when you are looking at the competition aspect of this, this is a challenge that we are currently seeing throughout the ball python market, and that is that there's essentially too many ball python breeders for the, I would say, top tier shows that have placements available for them. So what ends up happening is that for the top tier shows, the ones that are best able to move those $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 animals, the only people, or the vast majority of people who are able to vend those shows are those who are already in the hobby and are already industry leaders. And this can be really challenging if you are getting into the hobby right now, because I would say for the most part, unless something drastic happens in the entire ball python breeding hobby, I don't think that there is a viable way for a new ball python breeder to get into a show like Tinley Park NARBC, because the waitlist is years and years long, and if you are getting in right now, there are so many people ahead of you, and there are, realistically speaking, due to their limitations that they're putting onto it, limited amount of ball python tables. I just don't see any realistic situation where a new breeder gets into the Super Bowl of the reptile show unless there's some kind of backdoor deal going on. So looking at the entire ball python market, what this ends up meaning is that one of the most tried and true proven ways in order to move animals, at least on the higher end side of things, is essentially closed and isn't really an option to new breeders. So this leaves new breeders with realistically only 3 other options, and that is smaller local shows. But the problem with smaller local shows is that these shows can be amazing for moving those pet level animals, but it is really hard to attract the right type of person to a small local show who's willing to spend $5,000 on an individual animal. And even if that local show does attract somebody who might have been willing to spend $5,000 on an individual animal, most people don't expect to see those types of animals at local shows, so even if it was there, they weren't prepared to make that purchase, and therefore it makes it much harder than if you were selling at a national level show such as Tinley Park or Daytona or anything like that, where people will specifically save up money in the months preceding that show in order to buy animals there. So altogether, I don't think that local shows are the best place to sell these kind of enthusiast level and up animals. If we're not looking at local shows and the national top tier shows are essentially closed to new breeders, that leaves us with the online market. And I do think that morph market is the saving grace for this specific segment of the hobby, because without morph market, I don't think that there would be a good platform for most enthusiast level breeders to sell their animals without building up a massive platform for themselves. So I think that morph market, whether this is regular morph market listings or the auction features, I think both of these are realistically the most viable way for newer breeders to sell those $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 animals. The challenge of this, again, comes due to the competition, because if you post your animal today and it doesn't sell within a month, it's very, very likely that the next time somebody has that exact same combo, that they're going to price theirs lower than yours in order to essentially try to undercut you and make the sale first. And what ends up happening with this is that it creates a race to the bottom where prices fall really, really fast. And while Morph Market isn't the entire hobby, I do think that for the vast majority of the hobby, it is used to determine the fair market value of any specific combo. If you are a newer breeder, and let's say you could have taken that animal to a show and sold it there, instead you have to post it on Morph Market and it doesn't move for quite a while, therefore it ends up dropping the prices for not only yourself, but everybody else in that project, and it subsequently negatively impacts everybody in the breeding hobby. The last option that I think is open to new breeders, and in my opinion is the hardest but also the most effective way if you're able to do it right, is by building up your own specific brand, your own specific platform in order to sell your animals. So this essentially means that you need to be really, really good at social media, you need to attract a following to you, and you need to know how to leverage your audience in order to make the sales that aren't relying on Morph Market and aren't relying on a show of any sort. And if you can do this really well, you can essentially bypass a lot of the market conditions because you have a lot of people that you have built up who want to support you, and it can safeguard you later on. That said, it can take years and countless hours of work, and there's no guarantee that you will be successful anyway. So what we want to do for the last part of this video is talk about some potential solutions that might be able to help with this problem and allow those newer enthusiast level breeders to still sell their animals without necessarily having to be a viral social media sensation. The very first thing deals with getting tables at shows in general. So right now, for pretty much every single reptile show that I know of, if you get a table for it, and I don't mean subleasing a table from somebody else who's already vending it, but I mean you get your own table. Once you get that table, you essentially are able to lock it in as long as you prepay for the next show every single time. So at a show like Tinley Park NARBC, you can get a table and people will, for the most part, never, ever, ever let them go. And while Tinley Park has implemented a rule not allowing people to sublease their tables anymore if they're not there, it is still putting into a challenge where the vast majority of people are not going to let those tables go. So I think that a potential solution in order to get fresh blood into the ball python breeding hobby, specifically on the show side, is for the big top tier shows to have a set number of tables, maybe not very many, maybe 5, 10, something like that, depending on the show, where these tables are essentially non-renewable. So the way that this would work is that there are a set number of tables at each of these kind of top tier shows. Let's say that there are 10 non-renewable tables for it. What it would do is it would go to the wait list, and they would be offered to the people on the wait list. And the people on the wait list would be able to book these tables just for that one specific show, on the understanding that they are not going to be able to renew it, so they don't have a permanent spot at that show. And once they win the show and they return to the wait list, they don't return at the very top of the wait list. Instead, they go to the back of the wait list. So that way, the next show comes around and the next 10 people have a chance to vend it, and it keeps going like that to ensure that there are new people who are always able to vend the show. And even if a permanent table never opens up again, there's still a chance for you to continually vend that show. It just might not be every single time. Maybe it's once every 3 or 4 years, depending on how long the wait list is. Another possible solution for this is to have a set number of tables that are specifically reserved to people who have never vended the show before. And again, just like the non-renewable ones, these are not going to be able to be held once you vend there. They are specifically designed to allow new people to come into the show and vend it in order to give them more opportunities to sell their animal and keep the ball python economy healthy. Because if these lower level breeders are able to sell their animals and do well at the show, it's very, very likely that they are in turn going to spend some of that money on an animal that will let them level up their projects and progress in their ball python breeding operation. And the third and probably hardest, biggest thing to really pull off is, rather than having an entire reptile show that's dedicated to all the different types of reptiles, which are amazing, and this is a huge part of the reptile hobby, This issue is primarily impacting ball python breeders getting closed off from a show. So the solution on this is to create an all ball python show. And in the all ball python show, one, it allows more tables to go to ball python breeders, but in order to mitigate the chance that only the people who are already established get all of the tables, I think that very similar to how regular reptile shows will often limit the amount of ball pythons in order to not dominate the entire show with one species, I think that a show like this, a all ball python show, should in some way try to make sure that there are tables available for ball python breeders at every single level. And again, this is still likely going to result in situations where if it's a good show, that new people aren't able to come in. So I still think that you should have those non-renewable tables. I still think that you should have new vendor tables as part of this. But by making sure that you are going to have some of the breeders be high-end, some of the breeders be mid, and some of the breeders be entry level, what it can do is as people come in to buy pets, predominantly the entry-level breeders are going to be the ones selling those animals. And if the entry-level breeders do well, they will be buying animals from both the mid and the high-end breeders in order to make sure that everybody is able to profit and everybody is able to succeed within one show by making sure that the top of the ball python breeding hierarchy isn't the ones who are essentially disproportionately taking the vast majority of the customers. I say all of this with the knowledge that even these things I don't think would actually solve the problem. They might help it a little bit in very, very small ways, but I don't think that it's enough to just simply get newer breeders tables at these shows. If you don't have the marketing presence, if you don't have the brand, if you don't have the networking potential, you are not going to be able to succeed even if you do get a seat at one of these amazing top tier national level shows. So with that said, I think it's so important to market yourself. I think it's so important to become part of the community, and I think it's so important to be strategic with how you're breeding your animals. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next week.